where we get to talk about how we're going to move forward from here. And I would like to solicit input from board members now relative to Dr. Cash's proposal about the pilot school and implementation either all at once or over time. So, Mr. Heron.
One thing that came to mind, and it fit both Dr. Cash and also Ms. Limon, in this discussion group of people talking about the discipline guidelines, I would like to have that question answered before that group even meets, is to each one of these items that says law enforcement notification, what part of that is mandatory? Because in some cases, there's 2 or 3 items in there, and maybe just, I don't know, maybe one is mandatory and the other 2 aren't. So some isolation specifically of each of these that is mandatory, and even if it has to be broken out into another item where part of it's mandatory and then part of it isn't, but then, more importantly, in every one of these that says possible law enforcement, what triggers that? What makes something all of a sudden call the police? Who has that discretion? Who makes that call? And is it uniform across does every student get treated the same? I mean, part of what I've read is that it's more likely for a Latino student to be call the police than it is for a white student. And that's not just here. I mean, that's uniform in everything I've read, is that certain actions are taken more quickly with Latinos, blacks, than they are with whites. And so what makes that decision? And is it, just, where it says possible, what are the ramifications? Who does it?
It's a great suggestion. Ms. Limon?
Well, I actually wanted to see if we could have Mr. Price talk a little bit. We actually just consulted on just even the word notification and what that means, and so I'm hoping he can recap a little bit of our conversation.
Following the earlier discussion in response to Ms. Limon's question about whether possession of a drug automatically requires reporting to law enforcement, the answer to which is yes. We discussed at the break the further fact that notification in and of itself doesn't define what the law enforcement response ought to be or how the school district handles that notification. And it seemed to Ms. Limon and me in discussing it during the break that the board and staff would have an option in terms of discussions going forward to identify circumstances under which the notification to law enforcement may have associated with it a request or suggestion that no follow-up or further action is required at this time by law enforcement. And again, not, I'm sure, because there's an intention to let the so-called scofflaws get off and to have there be leniency in drug use at campus, but rather in order to, as I think the board is moving towards, attempt to develop a more effective way of dealing with that particular issue, meaning that it would be accompanied by a strategy at the district level which would work with the kids who were, for example, first offender, small amount of marijuana possessors, to, instead of having law enforcement immediately come to the campus and arrest them, for example, to work within a program that's set up at the district level, maybe in concert with whatever it's teen court or something outside, that would seek to more effectively engage the student and reduce the amount of drug use both on campus and away from campus, which is what you're all striving to do. So I think that's one approach that you could consider taking, and I think that that approach would obviously involve some consultation with law enforcement, with the sheriff, the police department, and possibly Joyce Dudley's office.
Mrs. Parker.
I think that what Dr. Cash has presented here makes a lot of sense. I am fully in favor of moving forward with a pilot program at a junior high school. And I hope that we can see more information in the next couple of months.
Mrs. Cordero?
I concur, but I would like to, I know that it would be premature to evaluate the program's effectiveness after a year of just piloting it. But I would like to have some ways, some types, or some type maybe of evaluation conducted where we can try to get a sense of whether we're moving, whether it's actually moving us in the right direction. For example, maybe an attitudes assessment or something like that. Because I would like to know, I agree with Dr. Cash, and I think Ms. Deegan, I think you also said it, that changing to a restorative model is likely to change attitudes and campus climate. And so I would like to see over the course of the year the staff who are using it and working with it, if it does change attitudes or understandings or approaches, or just what effect is it having on the staff who are doing it. So I would like to see some aspect of that included to the extent that we can, not as a, for me, not as a measure of whether we should continue to do it or not, but more as a measure of whether that is going to address the issue, or whether we're going to need to do something else
yeah.
to address the issue.
Great idea.
And I also, I apologize, Dr. Cash, I don't remember when you were listing who you thought would be, excuse me, part of this group to kind of help move this forward, if you included board members or not.
Did not, but we could certainly have a board member or board members on that group.
I would like to see that, because I think, I was kind of thinking of how we did it with the surplus property task force, and there was just so much information that we gleaned from that I think is valuable for a board member to be able to bring back, and also to then be able to participate in. So I do, although I know that once we do that, it becomes a Brown Act committee, and so I don't want to
Well, not
hamper what we do.
Not necessarily. I mean, if it's,
Okay.
if it's a single board member, I think it's fine,
Okay.
isn't it? I mean, on the task force, they,
Informals and
But-
single board member,
Non-voting?
well,
Yeah,
somebody
okay.
who comes in and maybe it changes and.
Are you volunteering?
I would volunteer, sure.
I'm sorry, in order for it not to be Brown Act compliant, there needs to be no board action taken to appoint anyone. In other words, it would be superintendent action.
he was just checking to see if she was interested.
That would be the superintendent acting.
That's what I heard.
Mr. Heron?
Have any of these other districts answered the question or talked to you about, okay, so we do it in one junior high school, so we got 7th and 8th graders going through this process. Let's just focus on the 8th graders. So for 1 year, they have this new program. They go to a high school, and they're back into the same rut that we're currently in. How do you handle that? How do you take 7th and 8th graders and you mold them at one junior high, and then they almost immediately go into an environment that's not the same?
Well, interestingly, all three schools have the plan to take the high school which would be the predominant matriculation pattern. I was trying to use not the other word that I've been told not to use. So for example, if Santa Barbara Junior High School was the junior high school, then the next school that would probably be along that training route would be Santa Barbara High School. So there would be an opportunity for those students to have, and that's what Denver did to start it. And Denver spread to every school in the district. Within, I think, 3 years, they had almost every school up and going. And they're vastly larger than us, but that was the plan, and Carlos is doing that in San Francisco with his 3 pilot schools as well.
So it's not just a case of finding a junior high who's willing to do it. You have to find their high school and get their willingness to do it a year from now.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, that would be the best thing to be able to do, absolutely. But one of the big components of support in making it successful, at least as shared with me by these 3 districts, was students and parents as well as staff, and kind of almost an insistence that this is the how my student is engaged at any school in the district. So, but yes, I would agree. It would be best to have everyone, as quickly as possible, be interested in, changing how they interact with kids.
Going back to the data, if I can go back just with one question. We've been accused over the past several years, we get the expulsion numbers and the suspension numbers, but what we don't have are the numbers that we've been accused of somehow getting students to voluntarily go to another school. Sort of circumventing the expulsion, circumventing some suspension, but magically parents volunteer to have their children moved. And we've been accused that that's been willfully done. Any numbers on that, or, FCMAT report mentioned that.
Well, I can tell you that definitely, we do have families volunteer to go to El Puente. I think what we don't have is a uniform definition of the word volunteer. So both Mr. Sumter and I have been working with the Santa Barbara County Office of Education, our high school administrative teams, and understanding that the word volunteer is a parent-initiated request when they've been given the plus and the deltas for changing a school environment for their child. And after that, if the decision is by the parent to voluntarily transfer, then we will call that a voluntary transfer.
Thank you.
Okay. I think in the absence of any further direction, we'll just clarify what we would like you to do. It sounds like we would like to move forward on the pilot plan, and you would be consulting presumably with the principals at the junior highs and getting back to us on a recommendation for that.
3 of them already, as they left, said that they were the school that should be picked.
Yeah, I bet. Sure. Ms. Limon has a question.
Very eager.
So on that note, you just said something that triggered a thought, which is informally, I mean, we've discussed the fact that we will and already have gotten some resistance, but from at least our site leaders at the secondary level, informally today it sounded like there were several that were interested. Do we anticipate that at least with our site leaders we're going to have that response? Our secondary site leaders at the time, or do we, what are we not thinking of? What should we try to troubleshoot, or should we think about now that might cause?
Well, I think the most significant thing is going to continue to be involving the stakeholders in the process, and making sure that classroom teachers are involved in the process from the very beginning, helping define what it's going to look like in particular. Because with restorative discipline, there's like several different ways in which you can go about that process. The actual process, whether it's conferencing, whether it's mediation, whether it's what they call circles, which I'm very familiar with my own background in having. So those kinds of decision-making processes we need to engage the stakeholders, kids, parents, staff. Doing that up front, I think we'll be able to overcome some resistance, but I know that because it's clear everywhere that's been done that we will still face it. We will face it from people not involved in the process, who don't have a immediate stake in the school with a kid or an alumni or whatever, just members of the community. And I would have to say that one of the things in the conversation that we had when we did look at the data was not a sense of resignation by our administrators as to, whoa, what are we going to do? Woe is us. But oh my gosh, we really need to do some important things quickly, very quickly. So I think that's going to happen.
To answer a little bit about the administration too, we've had just a couple of changes, but a year ago when we had a large forum of restorative justice, we brought down some people from Oakland and talked about it. We had community partners in the room. After that, we talked about it for several weeks, and every single administrative team was highly in favor of moving forward. It's taken us a while to get there, but we did start and they all wanted to go forward.
Ms. Cordero?
I would love to see us have a large forum of students talk about the restorative discipline and how they see it, what their perceptions, or either the things that they might anticipate liking about the process, or any fears that they might have or misconceptions that they might have, because I think the students have a very strong network, and the more we can get our students to understand the process and to understand the rationale for it and what's going on, I think the better it will be, because I think that will spread very quickly throughout the student body, and I think it would be really helpful for them to feel a part of it, especially since one of the main foci, as you mentioned, Ms. Lamone, of restorative discipline is that it is very student-centered. So,
And I would think the student organizations that already exist, like the ASB and the student newspapers, would be good channels for soliciting information from their peers, as well as organizing forums.
yeah.
A couple other
Mr.
things. Teachers. You mentioned the teachers are the backbone of this. Obviously, it's a huge burden put on them to work all these things out in a restorative way. And obviously, I think they need to be involved in the discussions. And obviously, I'm sure that the Teachers Association will make sure they are involved in it. But they have a major role in this, and it's across the board. So I think we need to spend time with them. I'd like to know if these other districts have some things that all the other schools can do in the meantime. In other words, it seems to me that if we spend a year and a half going in this one junior high, and yet we know we have a problem, and we say, okay, the rest of your schools keep doing what you're doing, and we'll worry about your problems later on. Are there a series of things, even though it's not restorative discipline, are there a series of actions that the other schools can be taken while we're doing this test to solve some of these problems? Because I'd hate to see all the other schools just continue doing business as usual, thinking, okay, our turn will come a year and a half, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, 4 years from now. So we're just going to continue doing the same things that we acknowledge aren't really working. And then finally, going back to the stats, it's very obvious that controlled substances, both in these numbers and also in the Healthy Kids survey, show that the use of marijuana is very high on some campuses. And so I don't know when we're going to bring back the issue of the drug-sniffing dogs, but we talked about doing it after we have this meeting. So I don't know where that plays into it, but the numbers indicate that I've seen that that's something that needs to be discussed now, not a year from now. And so I'd like consideration given to rethinking that or revisiting that.
Can I just say also, in reference to that, Mr. Herron, and to what Ms. Limon made the request of, and that you made the request of Mr. Price, if we could start looking at those law enforcement notification recommendations right away, I don't know if that would necessarily have to wait until the restorative justice piece or not,
No.
because,
That would help.
you know, I mean,
No,
I think.
I
one
mean,
of the
we could
things-
redo the existing matrix with
Right.
just more clarity. And then, I mean, that could be done immediately. I
Well,
mean-
that matrix is going to be in effect for all the other schools but one.
Well, what we're planning to do is to get together a larger group to look at the matrix in a different way, simultaneously to the implementation of RJ in one of the schools. So I think one of the ways in which we could address what I think you raised a really important issue is that if the board decides to change the discipline matrix based upon a recommendation by this group, which may include a board member, I don't know, I haven't decided yet, is that would impact every school. And it would be a way in which there would be substantive change then, most likely. So, and it would be a big step along the way for everyone else.
And things like what Mr. Becchio described about the truancy are already happening. And so there's certainly no reason why, if other schools chose to follow that suit, or maybe they don't need to as much, but at any rate, that's something that we could see the benefits of quickly and wouldn't necessarily have to wait for this. And I just wanted to reinforce your piece about the teachers, and I know Dr. Cash is as well. Mr. Wheeler couldn't be here today, but he probably contacted all of us. I know he contacted me, and I know that they're very interested in being a big part of this. And of course, since classroom management is the first tier, they're going to have to be. So we want to make sure that we do it in a way that works for them as well. Okay, so I think, unless we have any further comments, is our directions clear to you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then, at that point, I will close the meeting. Thank you. We are adjourned.